we spend some time with them. They're lovely people.
I did have, like, the week before, we did have a business meeting.
Yeah, he told me.
Fajra.
Tagra. Yeah. Were you up there, were you?
Yeah.
Oh, you should have told us. We would have come and said hello to you.
No, I just arrived on Tuesday morning, so we had the whole day, like, a big business meeting.
And then you come
And
back.
then on Friday, same, and then we just come straight
Okay.
back.
such a rainy evening. It's not usually the best time to come out, but thank you for coming. As I was introduced, I am a GP first and foremost, but I do have a background in science. I'm also a herbalist. I've studied nutrition, so I have a lot of areas that I'm very passionate about. And I thought I'd just share a little story about how I got to where I was, or I am now. And that is, I went to medical school over 20 years ago now, so that kind of describes my age, so I won't admit totally how old I am. However, when I went to medical school, I went with all of this kind of very big ideals about how I was going to really fix everybody up, and I was going to cure everybody of their diseases and bring good health. And I have to admit, it only took me a few weeks for that whole ideal to crumble. And I learnt very quickly that as a doctor, my job was to manage disease. It wasn't really about to restore people's health. And that's what we were pretty much indoctrinated from the time that we hit medical school. We're here to manage diseases. And so I have done that for the last 20 years and done that with a lot of enthusiasm. But at some stage I realised it wasn't enough. And it particularly became important a few years ago. So I was actually born without a proper stomach. And at a very young age, I was about 4, I had some surgery to correct the problem. It was a pioneered surgery at that time in Australia. And so I was able to continue obviously growing and having my life for the rest of it. A few years ago, that surgery failed. And so I was almost back to square one again with my health. And I went from quite a few different surgeons to one of the best surgeons in Australia and Sydney, but it wasn't good news. They couldn't fix it again with any more surgery, and I was told to go away with some options for some quite heavy medication and to use that for as long as I needed until they were going to basically put a permanent tube into my stomach so I'd never eat again. So it would be just a tube that I would have being fed through the stomach. They would close off the top of my stomach and I'd never be able to eat again. So that was pretty bad news for me, and I didn't really know what I was going to do. So that started my journey into looking at natural therapies, things that I could do to try and restore my health, rather than looking at ways I could just manage the disease or manage the condition that I had. And within a few months, I was starting to get some answers. And within about 6 months, I had some very good answers, and I'm pleased to say, from here on out, I have managed this with just natural therapies. I don't require medication, and I'm here 4 years later still with no further issues. So I know that my job now is to teach people and to teach you guys that you can restore your health for the most part. Yet there's some things that are still difficult. Some things we may still require pharmaceuticals or surgery. There are urgent things or, major infections or injuries that we still require modern medicines, but they're still, the natural remedies are really, really effective for lots of chronic disease, certainly great for preventing a lot of disease, and that's what I'm here for today, is to share that knowledge and for you to implement as many of these things as you can in your lives. And you'll probably notice throughout the next 4 days, so there's 8 lectures, so it's quite intense, but you'll see there's repeating themes throughout that, and you'll get the similar sort of messages. It doesn't really matter what chronic condition you have or what you're trying to prevent. They're very similar messages that are coming through. Now, the other thing I just want to let you know, I do have patient handouts or notes on all of these things that I'm doing. So if you feel like you want to take notes, feel free to do so, but you don't have to, because I have put it all in quite a comprehensive handout. And I can obviously email that to somebody within this church here, and then you can just obviously get a copy of them if you'd like. So we can certainly do that. If you want to leave your email, your phone number or something like that, we can organise you to get a copy of that. The other thing I want to encourage you to do is ask questions. So I don't want to just stand here and just feel like I'm just doing an information dump. If you have questions, feel free to interrupt me. I certainly will leave question time at the end, but don't hesitate if you need me to clarify something. I'm more than happy to be stopped to do that. Okay, so let's launch into the first talk. Now, this is one about immunity, and I usually start with that because that's probably one of the most topical things and has been so for the last couple of years for obvious reasons. But even prior to these last couple of years, we have entered a society where we have now got lots of issues with immunity, whether it be all the superbugs that have become treatment resistant, autoimmune disease, infectious disease, they're all starting to really escalate. So even long before this pandemic, we've had these issues here. So I want to guide you through this and some of the things that you can do for yourself. But there's two things that it's really important when it comes to a prime immune state, and that is we've got to reduce inflammation in our bodies and reduce that oxidative stress that can come with a lot of these lifestyle factors that we're not doing so well with. So we'll look at some of the things that we can do to win that war. Now, the first thing I'm going to talk about is actually exercise. Now, it's probably the most hardest thing to implement in your life. That's why I'm going to address that first. But we know that it has a huge impact on that oxidative stress that we're talking about, that thing that causes inflammation. We know that it really is really important to boost your immunity. And we know that there's lots of other things that can help. So even just with your ability to improve your sleep, it will lower your stress levels, anxiety levels. All those things are really implicated in immune functions. But we have shown with research it will halve your risk of developing colds and flus by just doing a moderate amount of exercise. So how much is actually enough? That is it. Half an hour a day, something that makes you huff and puff. And you'll hear this over and over again. We don't have to be elite athletes. We don't have to have a particular kind of exercise. If it's something that's making you huff and puff, that is enough. If, however, you have got used to a particular kind of exercise that is not making you huff and puff anymore, you may have to up the ante or change the type of exercise that you're doing. So if that brisk walk that you're doing is not doing enough huffing and puffing for you, maybe change the type, maybe do a bit of cycling or a bit of swimming or something else just to improve that stamina. So something that's going to make you huff and puff for half an hour a day. That's all you need. Now, the other thing I've put on here is take a walk in the bush with eucalyptus trees. What on earth do I mean by that? Well, there was some really good research that was done in Japan. And it was done over a number of different categories. They basically took a group of very stressed businessmen. They took them out in a rural or country area in Japan, and they let them go for a walk in amongst some trees, some great big forest trees. Now, they were not doing the huff and puff kind of exercise. This purely was an experiment on the effect of the forest on these men. Interestingly, after doing this experiment, they measured their immune system before and after, a whole bunch of different immune factors, and it was phenomenal. The change was just absolutely unbelievable. Their immune function just went up significantly. And that effect actually lasted for a week even after they went for that particular forest walk. So they weren't quite sure why this was. So they thought, well, let's experiment with this. And we'll send a group of very stressed businessmen on a holiday somewhere, but not in a forest. Let's send them to another city where they can just have a bit of entertainment, enjoy a nice relaxing few days. What do you think happened? Absolutely nothing. It didn't improve their immune system at all. So they went, there's something about the forest that did this. So next they decided to measure all of what they call the aromatic compounds in that forest itself. These are the essential oils that were being emitted by the trees into the air. Then they copied that with an essential oil blend. They took a whole bunch of very stressed medical students who were doing 14-hour shifts, and they basically got them to diffuse these oils at night when they were asleep. Do you know what happened? Their immune system improved, okay, quite significantly. Despite the fact they were stressed, despite the fact that they weren't having a relaxing time, there was something in those oils that has a positive effect on your immune system. So what do we know which oils will do it? Eucalyptus will do it. So if you can get out into the bush at least once a week or find a forest of eucalyptus trees, go for it. Cypress does the same, pine, fir, they all have a very similar effect on the immune system. If you struggle to find that time, or if you just don't have that in your area, if you live in a very closed city environment, you can do that with essential oils. You make up your own little blend and put it into a diffuser. and you can use that in the evening or through the night. So that's another simple way that you can boost your immune system. As a recommendation, by the way, for diffusers, don't get a diffuser that heats the oil. Get one that's like an ultrasound, so it just has a vibration effect and will emit the oils that way. All right, so the next one is good nutrition. Now, this is, again, these are no-brainer options. We know that just by increasing your fruit and vegetable intake alone will have significant immune-boosting benefits. So just by increasing that and lowering down the amount of fat in your diet will enhance your immune system. We know that fruits, vegetables, nuts, grains, they have a load of beautiful antioxidants. If you just look at the food and look at the rainbow of colours that you find in those foods, they're your antioxidants. So include lots of those rainbow foods on your plate. Conversely to that, we know that diets that have the high amounts of animal products, that have a lot of fats, particularly those saturated fats that we find in animal products, are very pro-inflammatory. They really do a lot of damage to your immune system. So your ideal diet is what we call a whole food plant-based diet. Now, plant-based is quite easy to understand, obviously, derived from plants and not from animals, but it's more than just that. You can get some very unhealthy vegans because they're still living on plants. Sugar is still from a plant-based, predominantly. So we know that it's more than that. It's about using as your food in the most unprocessed form that you can get it. So having your fresh fruits and vegetables, you can have them from the frozen section as well, but also having your whole grain breads, your wholemeal breads, your whole grain pastas, your rices and things like that. So you want the least amount of processing from that plant-based kingdom. So that's what it means by a whole food plant-based diet. And you'll hear this over and over again through all the research. So it's something that's really important to remember in all of these talks. Now, the other thing is to make sure you have a low-fat diet. If you're eating a whole food plant-based diet, it's actually quite easy to achieve the low-fat component of that. So it tends to go as a package, but that's the best way to boost your immune system through good nutrition. Now, weight management. So this has probably become even more important through this pandemic. We know that obviously using moderate exercise and a good diet will obviously help to boost your immune directly, but it will also help with your weight management as well. So being overweight or obese puts your body in this sort of chronic low inflammatory state. So it just has this sort of low-grade inflammation that just goes on constantly 24/7 just by having that extra weight on you. So we know that does have a particular effect on the immune system. Obviously, it affects you with your blood pressure, for your risk for diabetes, stroke, a whole bunch of other factors as well. But one of the things that we particularly found throughout the pandemic was that obesity was a significant risk factor for the effect of COVID-19 infections. And the reason was because the fat cells themselves are very rich in what we call ACE receptors. Now, these are the receptors through which the virus gets into the cell. So the more overweight you were, the higher your viral load, the higher the disease burden that you had. So this is why I explained the unique risk factor for obesity, and it made them 50% more likely to contract the disease, twice as likely to be hospitalised, and more than 50% more likely to die from the COVID infection than those who weren't obese. So that's why it was so important to address this factor throughout the pandemic, even though we're sort of getting towards the end now. These factors are still important for other things that are going on as well. So weight management is essential, and I will be talking about weight management tomorrow night. So if you need to listen to that one, come along to that. Now, the other one is fever. Now, lots of people want to treat fever. It's quite, we're all used to just going for some Panadol or some Nurofen to try and treat a fever. But fever is your friend. I can't emphasize that enough. It is your body's way of mobilizing that immune system when you're getting an infection. It's the one that gets your immune system really going, is that fever. So we really want to enhance its effect rather than suppress its effects. Of course, if you're getting up close to that 40 degrees Celsius, yes, we're going to treat your fever. But most people will sit around that 38 to 39, and that's a good thing. That's something that's actually going to help us. And when I worked in pediatrics, we would never treat a fever in and of itself. We would treat people for pain or other aspects, but unless the temperature got close to 40 or over, we would not treat that fever because we knew that child would get better a lot quickly by having that temperature run. So by all means, treat pain, but don't treat a fever per se if it's going well. So that thermal effect, though, is what's really important. We're going to have a bit of a look at that later as well. So drinking, I've put down 8 glasses of water a day. There's probably a better formula, and I'll be sharing that in some later talks. But that is probably about roughly what the average adult will need, is about 8 glasses of water a day, about 2 litres. So research has shown that those who only drink about 2 to 3 glasses of water a day will be 4 to 5 times likely to develop a cold or a flu. So we're talking 400 or 500% increase. So that's huge, just by reducing the amount of water that you're drinking. So that's how important it is to stay hydrated. Viruses love dehydrated bodies. So as much as possible, make sure you're getting adequate fluids. Of course, in the hot weather, you'll have to increase the amount that you're taking in. So going back to some of that thermal effect, and this is the hydrotherapy side of it. So hydrotherapy, or using water as a therapy, we know that heat enhances your immune system. So if we can use water to do that, that is even better. And they've actually done some research even on just healthy individuals, taking what we call thermal baths or hot baths between about 38 and 39.5 degrees Celsius, the bath itself. There was a significant improvement in their immune function. Interestingly, if they followed that by a brief cold period, it would scoot up even further. So their immune function would really, really go very well. So how can you do this at home? And I really recommend this, even though it's quite hard to do at times, particularly in the winter weather. It's what we call a contrast shower. So basically you put your shower on as hot as you can tolerate without burning yourself, of course. You do that for about 5 minutes on the hot, 1 minute on cold as you can tolerate. And you do that a couple of times, and you're going down to about 3 minutes, and then 1 minute cold. 3 minutes hot, 1 minute cold. So always ending on the cold. So try it. Just test it for me. See how you go. I have done this even in the cold weather. It is a bit tough, but it does work really well to boost your immune system. Now, obviously, if you're quite frail or elderly, or if you have particularly nasty heart problems, I don't recommend you using this. It can be quite dramatic on the system if you're not used to it and you've got sort of a frailty associated with your current health. So for those who are a bit stronger in the system. All right, the next one is sunlight. So we know that vitamin D plays a very critical role in our immune system, probably far more important than any of the vitamin C advice. Vitamin D is super, super important. So it has been shown consistently to prevent respiratory tract infections, reduce the use of antibiotics, and enhance your immune function overall to a whole bunch of infections. A really interesting statistic that came out of the pandemic was that we saw that about 96% of people who were in intensive care with COVID-19 were vitamin D deficient. Now that's compared to less than 40% of the population, so it's a huge significant difference between those two groups. So vitamin D is essential. Now the best way to get vitamin D, of course, is through direct sunlight. Now the recipe for getting enough is up on the screen there. You need about a quarter of the time that it would take for you to get sunburnt, and I usually would recommend exposing face and arms as much as the legs as you can. So for somebody like me, it only takes probably less than 10 minutes, because within half an hour I'm a lobster. So it doesn't take a lot for me to get enough vitamin D, but if you've got darker skin, it takes a lot longer to get enough. Now the other proviso on this is if you live below the latitude of about Sydney, which all of you here do, you're not going to get enough vitamin D from sunlight in winter. So standardly, I would recommend having a vitamin D supplement through your winter months if you are below the latitude of Sydney. So it's just a fact that we're not often going to be able to get enough of that vitamin D through the winter months. Outside of the winter months, you'll be fine. But through those winter months, you may just want to supplement your vitamin D, particularly at times when we've got a lot of flus going around, colds, COVID obviously, and things like that. It might be important for you to do some supplementing there. So sleep. Now, a good night's sleep is about at least 7 hours, and I'm going to do a whole talk on sleep later in this week, so we'll give you some more information there. So that is the most helpful time. So 7 hours a night, and it's the hours before midnight that are most beneficial. So if you want to get the best immune response, that's what you would do. The studies have shown that individuals who've been inoculated, so they actually put the cold virus into the nose of people, a rhinovirus it's called, they were far less likely to develop any symptoms if they had 7 or more hours sleep. And they compared that to those obviously who had less. So about 7 hours a night as a minimum. And of course, try and get as many of those hours in before midnight as you can. Now the next one is stress management. There's a whole talk in and of itself. I won't be addressing this specifically, but we do know that stress will really depress your immunity. One of the major issues with immune function is how much stress you're under. Obviously, if you've got mental illness, anxiety, depression, or a lot of other sort of environmental stresses, it's really important to address those. Now, good ventilation is probably even more important than trying to disinfect all the surfaces in your house. Ventilation is more effective. So it is particularly good at preventing the spread of those smaller airborne particles. So ventilation will just help to keep those out of your home. So if you really want to help with that, try and get a couple of windows open in your house every day just to get the air moving, to get the things moving around your house. You need really good air exchange. Obviously, you don't want to sit in that draft and get the cold air running over you through the winter months. But as you're moving in and out of rooms, just open the window, get a bit of fresh air in and get that ventilation moving. So it's really important to get that happening to prevent the viruses from sticking around in your environment. And I would also recommend breathing through our noses as much as possible. Much better at humidifying that air, and we know that viruses don't like it. So if you can breathe through your nose rather than your mouth, you're far less likely to develop these infections. Now, some really helpful nutrients. Now, I'll put that one up the top there. Obviously, we just talked about that. Now, how much do you need? About 1,000 to 4,000 international units per day if you're below, in terms of supplementing in winter, if you're below that time period. Otherwise, use the sunlight. If you're not sure, you can actually get your vitamin D levels measured to see if you do need some extra supplementation. Most GPs can do that for you. Now, vitamin C, we do know that it has played a pretty good role in enhancing the immune system over the years. We don't have a consensus on how much, but we do know that we've got lots of fantastic sources of vitamin C here in Australia. In fact, we have one of the superfoods here in Australia, and that's the Kakadu plum. So if you can get some of that, it's it has 10 times more vitamin C than an orange. So just one of those will give you 5 times a daily need of vitamin C. But certainly all your citruses, guavas, your capsicums, particularly the yellow ones, strawberries, your leafy greens are all fantastic sources of vitamin C. So certainly include those in your diet. The next one's called NAC, or N-acetylcysteine. So this is the one that became quite famous in the pandemic. We did use it a fair bit. It is an antioxidant, a very powerful one. But its effects have been more shown to be in influenza. So this is one that we've used prior to the pandemic in terms of its effect on influenza. So although it doesn't prevent you from getting the infection, the research shows that only 25% of those infected with the virus will develop symptoms if they're taking NAC. This is compared to about 80% if they aren't. So we do know it has a significant benefit. Now, normally, I would recommend, if you're supplementing, about 600 milligrams twice a day for that one. There is ways to get it in naturally, in the form of cysteine, which is a precursor, and that's found in legumes, so all of your chickpeas, your lentils, and things like that, and also sunflower seeds. So if you want a natural source, that's a great source for those. Now, some more nutrients. So zinc, another really important one for immune defense. We know that if you have high levels of zinc in your actual cell, it will decrease the replication of what we call RNA viruses. Remembering that COVID-19 is an RNA virus, so it will decrease how it replicates. Now, healthy zinc-containing foods include your whole grains, such as your oats, your brown rice, legumes, beans, cashews, almonds. They're all really good sources of zinc. Be careful with supplementation. So I don't usually recommend supplementation on a daily basis unless your diet has a deficiency. The reason is it can prevent the absorption of other really important nutrients if you have too much of it. If you do decide to supplement, no more than 40 milligrams a day. You can potentially just push it up for a brief period of time. If you're certainly coming down with cold and flu symptoms, you can push it up to about 200 or 220 milligrams, but only for a very short period of time. So for a week, but no more than that. So that's one to remember. You can overdose on that one. Not overdose in terms of its effect, but in terms of preventing other nutrients from being absorbed. So 40 milligrams at a maximum, or get it from your natural sources. The other one's quercetin. So another one that was made quite famous throughout this pandemic, but it's been around for a very, very long time and used for a whole lot of its antioxidant, anti-inflammatory benefits, has some anti-cancer benefits potentially, but certainly does have some antiviral benefits, which is why we were using it. And how it works is what we call as a zinc ionophore. So it grabs the zinc and rushes it into the cell. So we heard before how zinc will stop that replication of the viruses. Quercetin acts with that zinc. It pulls it into the cell to do its job. Now you can get this naturally. You don't have to use the supplement in this one. Red onions are really good for it. Your red apples as well. Asparagus, carob, there's a watercress. All of those are good examples of where you can get some quercetin. And lots of people have found other sources as well, so I'm sure you can share those if you need to. If you do decide to supplement, it's 500 milligrams twice a day, but you can get it naturally. Selenium, another key mineral that we need to help with our immune system. It also has some anti-clotting benefits, which has been particularly helpful for COVID-19 because it itself has been known to increase your risk of clotting. So it's a nice one to make sure you have enough. It does reduce that oxidative stress. It does help to prevent viral infections. Now, it is actually quite dangerous in overdose. You will get quite nasty side effects with this one. So never have more than about 200 micrograms, not milligrams, micrograms if you're supplementing. But it's a very easy one to get naturally, and that's because it's found in very high doses in Brazil nuts. So just 2 to 4 Brazil nuts a day, you will get sufficient selenium to provide the benefits that you need. So that's one that you don't need to supplement, and you can quite easily in your diet. Now, magnesium is another one that's very immune supportive, does help to reduce susceptibility to a whole bunch of infections, including viruses. Natural sources are really easy to get here. Your leafy greens are a good source. All your nuts, your seeds, your legumes, your whole grains are all fantastic sources of magnesium. Now, I put melatonin on the list, and we're going to discuss this a little bit more later in the sleep talk. Now, it's a particular hormone that's released by the pineal gland in your brain that we use to help us to get off to sleep and to get our sleep-wake cycle regulated. But one thing we've shown with melatonin, that obviously many viruses will cause lots of oxidative stress, but this hormone is a really, really, really powerful antioxidant. So it's one that's been studied quite well recently, and we've seen a lot of these benefits. So if we can make sure we can get a good night's sleep and get our whole sleep-wake cycle sorted out, it will help with that melatonin production. We do know that as you get older, you reduce the amount of melatonin that you do produce. But just some important things to remember if you don't hear my talk on sleep later in this week is that in the evening, as much as possible, we want to foster that release of melatonin from our brain. So where possible, stop using all of your blue light devices. That might be phones, iPads, screens, computer screens. They emit a blue light and they can suppress your melatonin by up to 99%. So what you want to do is try and foster more of a yellow light in the evening. Now, when you get up in the morning, the sun is in the more blue light spectrum. As the sun sets, it's in the yellow light spectrum. So where possible, use your yellow light, your dimming lights, in the evening so that you can get that melatonin produced. So that's just a simple thing, but there's some other aspects that we'll talk about later in the week. If you do decide to supplement with this one, particularly if you're an older person and struggling with sleep, about 3 to 5 milligrams is all you need. One of my favourite parts, obviously being a herbalist, I'll always include some nice helpful herbs here. Now, the first two I put on the list is astragalus and ginseng. Astragalus is one of the most amazing herbs. I use it a lot for people who have deep immune issues, people who've got chronic immune issues. Astragalus is number one. So it will enhance what we call T lymphocytes and macrophages. These are really powerful immune cells. So it has a really good effect. Now, ginseng has a similar sort of thing. It will enhance your B lymphocytes, your T lymphocytes, and even some natural killer cells. So both of these are deep immune stimulators. They're not superficial ones, they're deep. They work over a longer period of time. If you're taking these, you want to take it for at least 3 months to get the benefits out of it. But for people, for instance, when I'm treating people with chronic fatigue from a multiplicity of viruses, whether it's glandular fever, Ross River virus, those sorts of things, I get these people to take it for at least 12 months to get their immune system back to where it should be. So astragalus is probably number 1 on that list. Another one that I just actually have started to use more recently is andrographis, which is a very strong bitter herb. But it does improve your immune system, the lymphocytes, natural killer cells, phagocyte activities. It has a very broad spectrum antiviral activity. It works against influenza, hepatitis, cold sore virus, wart viruses, HIV, and even SARS-CoV-2 as well. So it's a nice one that's come into its own on recently. Now, elderberry, it's a very old-fashioned herb. A lot of our grandmothers used to make the elderberry cordials. Here, this has been shown to directly inhibit viruses entering and replicating within the cells. So it's a really important one to improve your immune system in these circumstances. And you tend to use the flowers for this one rather than the actual berry. Echinacea, now this is one of the most studied herbs, particularly in Europe. And I would call this a superficial immune stimulator. So this is not one that will promote that deep immune system response, but it's something that we use more acutely when we get colds and flus, respiratory tract infections. It can even help in other types of things, such as skin infections as well. But it's a superficial one. It's the one that you want to take, early on, particularly if you're about to get a cold or a flu. Add echinacea into your regime if you can. Now, garlic, a very, very powerful little bulb, this one. Broad range of effects here from, viruses to fungal infections, protozoal infections, parasites, bacteria, you name it, it's got some very powerful effects. However, to get the most active form of it, you pretty much have to eat the bulb whole as it is, unless you get an actual preparation, a herbal preparation with the garlic in it. And the reason is as soon as you cut it or crush it, you're going to release a lot of those aromatic compounds already into the air or into the food. So you're losing that almost immediately. So the most powerful way to use one is just to eat a clove whole if you can. I know it might be hard for some people to tolerate. You can use it in your cooking for culinary purposes and all those sorts of things, but medicinally, try and just have it as a whole clove. So if you're getting a cold or a flu, just have a clove of garlic. It really is quite powerful. By all means, throw lots of garlic into your soups and into your food. You'll still get some of the benefits, but the strongest is actually having it fresh, whole. Now, I've put St. John's wort on that list. Some of you may have heard it in terms of using it in mental health, particularly depression. But interestingly, it is actually very active against what we call encapsulated viruses. Now, both coronavirus and influenza are encapsulated viruses. So it's one that, even though I haven't used it a lot, it can potentially help with preventing some of these viral infections. Particularly people I would find that helpful with if you get a lot of cold sores and things like that as well. Very prone to getting a lot of infections. St. John's wort may actually help with those things. Do remember though, St. John's wort is quite a strong herb. It does interact with some medications, so always check before taking that if you decide to use that. Thyme. Thyme is a fantastic herb. Fun fact here, it has nearly 20 different antiviral compounds within it. Actually, it has more than that. So to a lesser extent, you've got the oregano, your rosemary. They've also got some antiviral compounds, but thyme is a fantastic one. Throw that into all your cooking. You'll get lots of beautiful antiviral properties there. Olive leaf. Now, olive leaf does have some antibiotic, antiviral, and antifungal properties. I don't use it a lot, but some people really swear by it and get some really good results from that. So your olive leaf extract's another option. Now, curcumin. So more importantly, I've put down there is the thuracumin that you need if you're going to use a supplement. This is the active form of it. So this will reduce the infection from viruses, and it also contains lots of beautiful antioxidant, anti-inflammatory components. It's also a natural blood thinner as well. So particularly if you've got any clotting risks, such as from a coronavirus, it's a nice one to add in. And the reason I'm talking about thuracumin, so you'll find a lot of supplements out there that have curcumin. They might throw in a bit of black pepper or some of those other things. they're actually quite harmful to the tummy, some of those additives. But the reason they're using them is to try and get you to absorb the curcumin. So you're better off getting one that's actually already processed to the point of being able to be absorbed. So the thuracumin is the best option to using curcumin for whatever purpose that you're using, whether it's for immune system, you can also use it for joint issues as well. Thuracumin is the one that I normally would recommend. Now, I've put dandelion leaf on this list more in terms of, there was a fair bit of press about this one in terms of its effect on the coronavirus infection. Now, we do know that in the test tube setting, it was able to block the interaction between those ACE receptors and the spike protein. But remember, that wasn't a test tube setting, so that wasn't actually shown in a in-person type stuff. But there's no harm in using dandelion leaf, particularly it was used as a tea or just a water base. It wasn't a complicated one. So if you're going to use it to treat it, there's no harm in using it, and it may actually provide some benefit. So certainly can use that if you need. So obviously, as a physician, I'm a holistic physician, and I'd be very remiss if I didn't recognise the importance of spirituality in all of this, and we know that God is our greatest physician. We know that He has nothing about our physiology that He doesn't know or understand. So I really encourage you to really get in contact with that spiritual side of that you have, everyone has within you. We know that God is a source of a lot of our peace, and we know that stress is a major issue when it comes to immune function. So by all means, do get in touch with that spiritual side. Pray, read, whatever you need to do. God is the great healer. So I'm just going to leave you with that beautiful promise. Jesus came that you may have life and that you may have it more abundantly. So that's found in John 10:10. So that's actually the end of my talk there. Are there any questions? Anything, any burning issues that you might like to raise or share with the rest of the audience? Yes? Sorry. Sorry, the Brazil nuts. So you're talking about having too many Brazil nuts? Yeah, you can. So what was the question in terms of the effect? I wouldn't be eating more than about 4 or 5 a day. Yeah. Absolutely. No, they are very, very, very high in selenium, so you don't need a lot. Yeah. Yes?
Just wanted to ask about the relevance of carbohydrates and proteins.
In conjunction with the immune system? Sure. So we do know that in terms of carbohydrate, there's obviously more than one kind. The type that is helpful is the whole grain or the whole form of the whole plant base of carbohydrates. So you want the very complex things. You want the things that you find in your whole fruits and vegetables, your nuts, your grains. And so if you are eating carbohydrate that's highly processed, so you're talking your sugars, you're going to depress your immune system. So if you're eating a lot of sugar that's processed, whether it's your white sugar or your pastries, your biscuits, your desserts and things that are using a lot of processed sugar, you're actually going to depress your immune system quite significantly. The converse is true though when you're eating a lot of the whole food versions of it, a lot of the complex carbohydrates. And that's all your fruits and vegetables, your wholemeal, whole grain breads, your wholemeal pastas, your wholemeal rice. Those sorts of things have the opposite effect. They actually improve your immune system through its anti-inflammatory benefits, the antioxidant benefits. In terms of protein, and we're actually going to talk a little bit more about that in my next talk, which is going to be on cancer, which is extremely related to our immune system. Animal proteins are our worst enemy. So plant proteins don't have a deleterious effect. They have a beneficial effect, but we don't need a lot of it. In a whole food plant-based diet, we're never going to get more than about 10% protein, and that's healthy. That's considered healthy. All of these things that promote high protein, low carbohydrate are actually very damaging to our system, are very inflammatory. So having a whole food plant-based diet that's low in protein, low in fat, but high in the complex carbohydrate is the most beneficial diet for the immune system. And we will discuss that a bit more in our next talk. Yeah.
Do you get more benefit if you grind the nuts and flaxseed and that sort of thing and put it in your bread?
it really doesn't make a huge amount of difference. Obviously, if you are grinding them or you're processing them, you want to eat them relatively quickly because they will start to deteriorate once you start processing them. But there's no harm in grinding up your flaxseed fresh and putting it on a bit of cereal or putting it in a porridge. You can eat it whole, but actually some of those things are easier to use in a ground form, but certainly your nuts are quite easy to eat in their whole form. But there is no harm in grinding them up fresh and using them fresh. Obviously, if you grind them up and you're leaving them to sit around, they will go around a lot more quickly. Yeah.
Just in relation to time, you mentioned you can have it in your food. Can you also drink that as a tea or mix it with something?
Yeah, absolutely. So thyme is quite fantastic. So both as a tea or in the food. Even just drinking thyme tea, if you've got a really bad cough, fantastic for coughs, fantastic for respiratory tract. So anything, coughs, colds, flus, it's a beautiful one.
Besides thyme, anything else that we can drink that really, something before lunch, between breakfast and lunch, like a warm tea, what would you recommend is the best to boost your immune system?
I mean, thyme would be a good one. You can throw in a bit of oregano as well. They're really good options. If you want a bit of gut benefit, you could throw in some peppermint. That's a really nice one to have before lunchtime. Peppermint's better of a morning because it's a bit of a stimulant, it's a bit of a pep-me-up, and you can use your chamomile at night, which has got a similar sort of effect, but it relaxes you. But yes. No, look, yeah, tea bags are kind of a little bit adulterated, I must say. The stuff that you buy in the supermarkets often is irradiated. They've got all these other things in there. If you can, try it, and obviously if you can grow it, fantastic. If you can't grow it, there are some really good online shops where you can get your tea leaves and make it fresh. So, yeah.
I have got a question about, we talked about inflammation, and we didn't really talk about lemon and ginger and some of those other things that are often, really quoted by people as reducing, like reducing inflammation, in honey, for example.
Yeah, sure.
Or concoction or something.
Yeah, yep.
How does lemon and ginger, for example, relate to what?
Yeah, sure. So lemon, one of the aspects of having an anti-inflammatory diet is a diet that's what we call more alkalining. Believe it or not, even though lemon is a citrus fruit, you think acidic, for our body it is very alkalining. But in actual fact, having that whole food plant-based diet, predominantly the foods found in there are alkalining foods. So you don't have to specifically pick out one thing or another. Plant-based foods on the whole are very alkalining. However, animal-based foods are entirely the opposite. Once you start processing foods, once you start getting outside of the natural form of foods, they start becoming acidic. So yes, whilst we often will pick a certain thing to alkaline our diet or to improve that, and look, there's some beautiful juices that you can do with carrot, ginger, celery, lemon, all those sorts of things are beautiful alkalining juices. But as a whole, that if you want to look at it, in terms of just a whole range of things, a plant-based, whole food plant-based diet will provide that benefit rather than just targeting a few individual ingredients. But yes, there's no harm in using those to alkaline our systems, and we know that acid means inflammation, alkalining means anti-inflammatory benefits. So yes, that's why we use those, but often we don't address the underlying issue, which is that we're having a lot of acidic things in our diet. A lot of those fried foods, processed foods, all of those things are very acidic. And all we're trying to do is combat that rather than actually address the issue of the diet and using those other things, to just improve or provide a bit of a balance to it. Yes. There's someone over here, yes.
What is a good source of B12 vitamin? Is it true that there is pig skin in the tablets and injections? Is it true?
There's something about...
Pig skin is put into...
Oh,
the
okay.
doctor told me that pig skin is put into tablets and injections for B12 vitamin.
Okay, sure. I can't verify that or refute that. I actually don't know if that's what they use in the injections for sure. If you want a natural source of B12, there is a little bit of evidence there may be some a type of a water weed, a pond weed that does have some B12, but it's actually quite difficult to get. But to be honest, if you want a natural source, eggs are probably quite easy, and you don't need more than 1 or 2 a week at a maximum to get enough B12 if you're B12 deficient. So, I mean, obviously, you know, I do use...
What about if you're a vegan?
Yes, if you're a vegan, you will have to supplement, but it doesn't have to be from an injection or a spray or anything like that. There are some B12 fortified products on the market now, so you can look at some of those. As far as where the source in terms of coming from pig, I don't know. I haven't heard of that. I haven't looked into it. Yeah, it's possibly true. I can't refute or confirm that. So, yeah, no. But you look, yes, if you are purely plant-based and you can't get a source of B12 from a plant base, you will have to supplement. We do. There may be a few individuals who might produce enough B12, but it's extremely rare. We do not have that within our capacity. Our bodies have deteriorated with, centuries of use and centuries of genetic decline. We don't produce B12, so you will have to supplement if you have a pure plant-based diet. Obviously, like I said, if you're okay with it, you can use an egg. And look, to be honest, if you're getting an organic egg or you have your own chickens, it's going to be relatively safe to use 1 or 2 eggs a week as a maximum. Yeah.
What do you think about fish oil and fish? Many people believe so much in that food.
Yeah, so look, one of the things that's quite difficult is that there are some things in the animal kingdom that might have some beneficial properties in them, but often the harm that comes from those far outweighs the benefit. Now, if we're looking for omega-3, which is what they often promote the use of fish for, you can get a much better source in flax seeds, walnuts, chia seeds, a much healthier form of your omega-3s from that. So, and then you're not going to get the other harmful effects that may come from fish. The other thing that to remember is that not all fish is going to provide that benefit either. It's really only the deep sea fishes, the tuna, the sardines, the salmon. The rest of the fish in terms of, or the seafood category, the harm in that is quite large. And also, if you think about tuna and salmon, they are quite high up the food chain, so that the toxins have actually increased up the food chain. They become a much more toxic fish. So if you want to get that omega-3 benefit, use your flaxseed, use your walnuts, use your chia seeds, whatever your preference is. That's what I would recommend.
Thank
you. Okay. Yes.
Can you tell us more about peeling or unpeeling fruits or veggies? Lots of the people, they're just concerned about pesticide on the fruits or veggies. So like, for example, just eat like a lemon peel or apple or cucumber or some of these. So what do you recommend, like a peel or unpeel?
Of course, if you can grow your own, that is not an issue. But look, if you wash it thoroughly, you're usually going to be okay. So, but look, it's an ideal. If you can get your food in an organic form, that's the ideal. If you can grow your own, that's even better. But I think we're going to, and we'll talk a little bit about this later on as well. So a lot of those pesticides, all those chemicals and things, the concern that we have is they can cause cancer. They can cause other things. But we do know that we can prevent those things by having a healthy diet. So even if we do get exposures to some of these carcinogens, if we are eating a really good diet, if we're using exercise and all the other lifestyle factors, it is null and void. It doesn't have that effect on us that the fears that we have about that. So I think, yes, for as much as possible, wash your food thoroughly. Obviously, if it's got a thick rind and you're concerned, take that off. You can peel your potatoes, but probably better just to wash them thoroughly. And then obviously, if you can, use a skim, because there's benefits in a lot of skin in the fruits and vegetables as well. So often there are compounds in those that are not found in the flesh. So yes, by all means, organic or homegrown first, organic next, and then obviously just wash them thoroughly, cleanse them thoroughly, and then use them as you would. Yeah. Alrighty. Okay, guys. Oh, yep, one more.
Just wanted to ask, can you overdo it with using olive oil? And a lot of people just use it for everything and for frying.
100% you can overdo it. So Again, if you look at the concept of a whole food plant-based diet, so olive does come from the olive, olive oil will come from the olive, but it is a processed food. So it's not a whole food. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't use a little bit here and there, but yes, you want to have a low-fat diet, as you would find in a whole food plant-based diet. So you don't want to drown everything in olive oil. You don't want to fry everything in olive oil. And we were talking about, like I said, we'll talk a bit more of this about in the next talk as well. But yes, you can overuse your oils for sure. Yeah. Okay, guys, 10 minutes break, and then we'll come back and we'll start the next talk. so let's start our next talk on cancer. But just one thing before I start, there was a question online, someone listening, about NAC and acetylcysteine. What I didn't mention, there are some people who can't take NAC, and anybody who's got any issues with their stomach, whether it's be stomach ulcers or inflammation of the stomach, and those with allergies as well will really not do well with NAC. So I don't recommend them for those who've got any issues with their stomach or major allergies. It will make things a lot worse for them. So NAC is for those who don't have stomach issues or don't have a lot of allergies. So that's just a question from online. Otherwise, moving on to our next talk, and that's about cancer. What can we do to confront this thing? And in this year, we've seen a great increase in the number of cancers and cancer deaths, so it's been quite a dramatic change. Prior to now, it was always sort of heart disease, dementia, but we're seeing a big rise in the cancer. So it's really important to address some of the issues associated with cancer. It is one of the most feared diagnoses, of course, and it's one of the hardest things I have to do is break the bad news to someone when they do have it. But there's certainly some really good natural ways to help prevent it and obviously improve your chances of survival from it. So we're going to go through some of those. Before I start, just some of the Australian statistics, by the way, they're not very current because we haven't received all the latest ones, but we know there's about 160,000 new cases every year that will be diagnosed in Australia. But 1 in 2 Australian men and women will be diagnosed, so nearly half will be diagnosed with cancer by the time they reach the age of 85. So as I said before, cancer is one of the leading causes of death, and in this last year it's increased by 20%. So it is currently the leading cause, overtaking heart disease and dementia. So in the 1980s, the cancer survival rate was probably less than about 50%. Today, almost 70% of Australians will survive for at least 5 years after their cancer diagnosis. Some cancers, that's been pushed up to nearly 90%, including things such as breast cancer. Now, the most common cancers, this excludes all those tiny little skin cancers that you do get, but the most common ones are there, your prostate cancer, breast cancer, bowel, melanoma, and lung cancer. They're the most common ones. So let's just have a look at some of the risk factors for cancer. Now, you probably will know some of these, they're quite obvious. So older age, we can't do much about that. Having a previous cancer diagnosis, again, there's not something we can do much about. Family or genetic factors can contribute to it for sure. Dietary factors. Now, there is lots of lifestyle things that can go on here, and these lifestyle factors are far more important than anything else that's in that previous part of the list there. Physical inactivity, definitely. Obesity, alcohol consumption, tobacco use are really, really important. Look, both alcohol and tobacco are both carcinogens in and of their own right. Most people would think that about tobacco, of course, but alcohol is a carcinogen. But we do know that we're exposed, like we said before, with the pesticides, all those sorts of things, we're exposed to carcinogens constantly in our environment. We can't help it, it's there. And look, we can always try and find all of these things that we can remove, all these carcinogens. But there's some really interesting research that was done in the Philippines by a gentleman by the name of T. Colin Campbell. And he is quite famous as an epidemiologist, nutritionist. But he was sent to the Philippines to work out something that was going on over there. And that was because there was children that were developing a rare form of liver cancer. And they were far and exceeding anywhere else in the world. There was these children that were just starting to get all these liver cancers. The local scientists did identify the carcinogen. They identified it quite quickly and quite readily that it was a fungus growing on the peanuts. But there was something interesting though. If you looked at the demographic of these children who were developing the cancers, it was all the wealthy children. The poor children were not getting it despite sharing the same diet of peanuts. So the poor kids weren't getting it, but the wealthy kids were. And so there was something very different in their diet outside of the peanuts, of course. And what they found was that the wealthy children were consuming a much larger amount of animal protein from cheese, milk, etc., chicken, all the expensive foods that the poor children couldn't afford. So even though both the children were being exposed to these carcinogens, these things that can cause cancer, One group was being protected for some reason and the other group wasn't, and the issue was animal protein. So we talked a bit about before the importance of protein, but we do know that animal protein is very strongly linked to cancer and also to a lot of other chronic diseases. So just have a look at a few of those things. Now, obviously excessive sun exposure, having too much sun can cause obviously skin cancers, having too little as well is important to address, but we'll come back to that. So there's two basic factors that will make you far less susceptible to developing cancer. And the first is having a very healthy immune system. So we addressed a lot of those factors in the talk before. We want plenty of those natural killer cells in our body. We want to have those tumour-fighting cells. All of those things in our immune system are really important. Cancer is also an immune dysfunction. So if you can think of those concepts and get them sort of cemented in your mind, you'll understand where I'm coming from. The other one, of course, is lowering the inflammation in your body. We talked before about the effect of inflammation on the immune system, so it's really important. These two go hand in hand. And we're going to look at some of those lifestyle measures that we can adopt to protect ourselves. First and foremost, what are our pro-inflammatory foods? The picture pretty much says it all. So your processed meats, your red meats, these saturated fats, particularly those found in animal products, are very inflammatory. Your processed sugars, before I talked about your complex carbohydrates, the things that are found in your whole foods versus your simple carbohydrates from very processed foods, your processed sugars, your processed, in terms of desserts and biscuits and pastries and white rice and white pastas and white breads. These are where you're going to get those processed sugars. So again, anything highly processed and refined is very, very inflammatory, and we know that there's very strong links in the research between these types of foods and an increase in cancers, particularly shown in breast and colon cancer with this particular scenario. So what are our anti-inflammatories? You will kind of hear this over and over again. Fruits and vegetables, these are the things, all those rainbow of colours that you see on your plate, they're the things that are going to protect you against cancer. Obviously, there are lots of antioxidants, lots of fibre, lots of anti-inflammatory compounds. They're all the things that are really helpful. Your whole grains, your nuts and seeds, beautiful anti-inflammatory properties in there, very protective. Legumes, very strong link there as well. And we know that a low-fat diet really enhances our immune system and protects you against cancer. So let's have a look at some of the very specific natural compounds. Now, it doesn't mean you have to go and seek these out because a lot of these things can be found in their whole food, but there's also some herbs that have been really helpful. So the dietary flavonoids or bioflavonoids, you may have heard this term thrown around. Again, it's those colours that you find in your fruits and vegetables. If you have a look at all the array of colours, it's a rainbow of colours in the fruit and vegetable kingdom. Those colours are coming from those flavonoids. So get a range of things. Don't just stick to all your red foods or all your white vegetables. You want to have lots of different colours as much as possible. Omega-3, we talked a little bit about this before. The safest form of those is found in your flax or linseeds, your walnuts, your chia seeds are really good sources. Soya beans as well have a bit of omega-3. Vitamin C, E and beta-carotene, really easy to get these ones from your berries, your citrus fruits. Vitamin E is particularly in almonds and your green leafy vegetables, so it's a really good way to get those. Beta-carotene, it's in the word, it's found in carrots, so it's a really good source of your beta-carotene. Vitamin D, powerful immune stimulator. We learnt about this before. Sunlight, of course, if you can, or supplement if you're having trouble getting enough. Lycopene, wonderful one, particularly helpful for prostate. So men, listen up. This is found in tomatoes, cooked tomatoes that is, and in watermelon. So that's a really good one to make sure you include in your diet as a protection for prostate cancer. Curcumin, we talked a little bit about this before in terms of the immune system, fantastic as well. We know that there's been some studies in parts of the world where they have a diet high in the turmeric root, which is where you get the curcumin. They have much lower rates of cancer. Selenium, again, we talked about this in the immune system. Lots of selenium in those Brazil nuts, as I've said. Sunflower seeds as well have a little bit too. Fibre. Fibre is front and centre in particularly bowel cancer, so really important to get that from your whole grains. Plenty in your fruits and vegetables as well. And you need about 40 to 45 grams per day to get the benefit in terms of protection against cancer. Now, particular foods that we found to have some anti-cancer properties, garlic is at the top of your list there. The cruciferous vegetables. Now, this is your broccoli, your cauliflower, your cabbage, your kale, those sorts of things are really, really good. Your soy products, and I've got on there as well the shiitake mushrooms are found to be quite beneficial to protect you against cancer. Now, herbs, again, if you look at that list, very similar. You've got your astragalus, you've got your ginseng, those powerful immune boosters. Astragalus has been shown to improve that 5-year survival rate from cancer, so it's a really good one to include. Even if you have cancer, you want to include that into your regime. St. Mary's thistle's on that list now. St. Mary's thistle works on the liver, and your liver is your great detoxer, so it's one that helps to promote your liver function and improve your body's ability to get rid of toxins. So, specifically, what the research is showing, breast cancer, you want to avoid particularly those red meats and things like that. You want to make sure you have good sources of soy in your diet and plenty in fruits and vegetables. So they're all the things that have been to show to decrease your risk, and obviously meat will increase that risk. Prostate cancer, you want to eat foods that are high in that lycopene I suggested before, and selenium. So they're two things that you want to include for prostate cancer. Colon cancer, it is really all about those red and processed meats. That one is the thing that causes the most risk, but you also want to make sure you have plenty of fibre, 40 to 45 grams a day, plenty of calcium, and of course folate as well. Gastric cancer or stomach cancer, again, those processed meats will increase your risk, but fruits and vegetables will decrease. But if you could summarise, if you looked at all of that, if you have adopted that whole food plant-based diet, you will get a lot of those components already. You don't have to specifically go out and get those foods, but rather just include those in your whole food plant-based diet. You'll be naturally avoiding all of those other things, your processed meats, your red meats, and so forth. So there's really good sources there just from your whole food plant-based diet. Now, what about cooking? Are there certain ways that you can cook your food that will make it more inflammatory or less inflammatory? The answer is yes, absolutely. So there are some very particular pro-inflammatory methods that Australians are very good at. We grill, we roast, we fry, we barbecue, which is one of the worst, unfortunately, and we bake. So all of these things increase the compounds that are called advanced glycation end products. Now, I'm just going to shorten that to AGE products. Now, these are very inflammatory, very toxic compounds that happen when you cook your food this way. And these are the dry, high heat methods. So if you think about when you are frying something, you're pushing the temperatures often above 200 degrees Celsius. And even though you're using oil, it is not a wet method of cooking, it's still a dry method of cooking. And you're going to increase these age compounds significantly, sometimes more than 100 times. Very toxic, very inflammatory. Particularly those things, the meat, the cheeses, the eggs, the butter, the cream, the oils, the margarines, they're the ones that are particularly affected by these methods of cooking. So it's true, fruits and vegetables and some of your other whole foods will be affected in a milder way, but it really is those animal products and those oils that will really increase those age compounds, those really inflammatory age compounds. So what's the alternative if we can't grill, roast, fry, bake or barbecue? Obviously, eating them fresh, eating your salads, eating your fruits and vegetables in a whole form, you're not going to have that issue. Using a moist heat. So this is something, if you think about the concept, if you're boiling, the temperature is only going to go to 100 degrees Celsius. That's the boiling temperature of water. So this is a lower heat, a moist heat. You're not going to get the same effect from having the other types of pro-inflammatory methods. So this is where you would use the other types, the boiling, the steaming, the poaching, soups and stews, all of those things are fantastic ways to cook your food. It's not to say that you can't occasionally have a bit of baked potato or something of that nature, but make sure you use primarily these moist, low-heat methods of cooking. They're the ones that are not inflammatory. They're obviously anti-inflammatory methods. Another option is to using a slow cooker where you have the lower heat for a longer period of time. But certainly there's not just the good foods and the bad foods. There's good ways to cook your food and not so good ways to cook your food. And like I said, barbecuing is the worst, and that's what we're good at in Australia. So I'm sorry to break the bad news. Try to avoid that method as much as possible. Now, obviously, stop smoking, avoid alcohol. Both of these are carcinogens, cancer-causing compounds. Now, there are dozens of carcinogens and co-carcinogens that work together, tumour promoters, all of those things. There's more than 7,000 of them found in cigarettes. So we want to avoid that. We want to give up smoking if we are smokers, and certainly there are ways to do that. With alcohol, there is no known safe level of drinking when it comes to cancer. There's no known safe level. It is a cancer-causing compound, that is for sure, and there is just no known safe level. So I can't recommend even 1 glass or 2 glasses. Alcohol is a carcinogen. Obviously, the more you drink, the higher your risk, but obviously I would also be recommending being teetotalers, not using alcohol as part of your diet. Now, exercise. What do we know about exercise and its role in cancer? Well, we know that it reduces your risk of colon cancer, and by the way, this is just the half an hour a day of something that makes you huff and puff. We know it reduces your risk of developing colon cancer by at least 30%, risk of developing breast cancer by 25%. It will reduce that risk. Now, it's also really important if you have cancer to still include exercise as part of your regime. It will improve your symptoms and quality of life throughout the treatment. It also improves that survival rate as well. So it's something that's really important. And there's that recipe. Half an hour a day, 3 to 4 hours per week as a half an hour a day of something that just makes you huff and puff. A brisk walk is often enough to just get you huffing and puffing. Sunlight, we learned a fair bit about this before. We do know that sunlight, or vitamin D in particular, will reduce your risk of a whole range of cancers. So it includes your colon cancer, your prostate cancer, your breast cancer, your lung cancer. It will reduce the risk of all of those. So it's a powerful immune stimulator. It's a powerful anti-cancer. So how much? There's your recipe again. About a quarter of the time it would take you to get sunburnt with your face, your arms, and as much of your legs exposed as possible. So it's not hard to get. If you're below Sydney, use some vitamin D as a supplement in winter. And that's the end of my brief talk on cancer. So, any questions? And even online, if there's some questions, please feel free to read them out.
As a treatment for all cancers. I'm interested to know, I like the idea of prevention rather than treating.
Sure.
But there have been experiences where people have had cancers and have not done too well. So the exercise and taking the treatment sometimes is very hard to do. So what's your opinion with the definition of cancers? Because you've mentioned all cancers under one word.
There's 1,000 different kinds of cancers. No, I agree. And look, a lot of this is about prevention rather than cure. Certainly when I'm treating cancer, because I have 4,000 patients, that's my patient load, cancer is not an uncommon thing that I have to deal with. But I do always encourage them to address all of the lifestyle factors. Yes, there are times, particularly if they're going through very intense chemotherapy, radiotherapy, a lot of these things they can't implement due to fatigue and a lot of other issues. But certainly they can do a lot about their diet. They can stop drinking their alcohol, stop their cigarettes, all of those sorts of things for sure. Yes.
Medicine today uses treatments like chemotherapy, and then there's this new one, Keytruda, but that seems to be more aggressive to
remove the immunity or the natural immunity in the body?
Yes.
And then how does the body then recover?
That's a really good question, yes. Even radiotherapy is a very big oxidative stress on the body, absolutely. So if you look at the concept of what medicine is trying to do, it's targeting a disease rather than a cause. It's targeting the result of other things going on. That is the nature of medicine, unfortunately. And that's, when I was talking before about my life had been all about managing disease and not about restoring health. And so, yes, people will go along these regimes of chemotherapy, radiotherapy, surgery, whatever it might do, but it's never actually treating the cause of the disease, but rather just targeting the result, what's at the end of the line, which is a tumour or a cancer sitting there. My job, however, is to try and build from the other end. There are some people who refuse these treatments. Then I can be a lot more aggressive with what I do, obviously using a lot more aggressive methods with diet and with, supplements and with exercise, sunlight, all those sorts of things. Obviously, if they're going through a chemotherapy or radiotherapy, whatever it might be, I have to, basically limit my program around that regime. But you're right, all of these will target the tumour and it will damage the immune system. And it's not uncommon for them to come back as secondaries because, again, we haven't done the job of fixing their immune system in the first place. It's the immune system that's gone awry. It's the immune system that hasn't done its job that's caused the cancer. That's what we should be targeting, but we don't often do that. But that's what I try to do. That's my method, is to target the immune system and target the lifestyle from that aspect, for sure. Yeah, and you're right, it's not a blanket approach for all different types of cancers. I will include different things depending on the cancer itself. For the nature of this talk, though, it's a little bit more difficult. It's such a huge topic, so I'm just giving you the principles rather than, specifics.
Just on radiation therapy and chemotherapy, I know a few of us know this lady. She's just finished rigorous radiation therapy and chemotherapy, and she's got terrible sores in her mouth and in her nose and bleeding sores. What's the best way to sort of heal those terrible things? And she can eat and,
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, look, the radiation itself can cause quite severe burns, and yeah, I know it's very nasty. It's internal, it's a little bit more difficult. Certainly, just the basics of using a very fluid diet for a while, so that can a lot of healing. Yeah, absolutely. So using obviously a very fluid diet, a lot of juices. I would recommend a lot of green juices, so using your leafy greens, certainly a lot of vegetable-based juices. You can add a few berries, strawberries and things like that in, but much more with the vegetable juices, and that will help with the healing. I think, yes, in that case, you very much want to target the immune system because she's had a lot of oxidative stress from that radiation. And it targets the cancer, I have no doubt about that, but it also damages the immune system. So she really needs to promote that immune function. Sunlight when she can, some vitamin D. Certainly would have been including the astragalus into her regime. That's all really important. Yeah, so this is a time when you want to start pushing back and improving the immune function, for sure.
Thank you. You mentioned the slow cooker as a preferred method of cooking. What is your view on the pressure cooker?
Yeah, so no, pressure cooker is fine. So it's still, even though it's still using moist heat, it's using water. Yes, you're throwing higher pressures in to cook it more rapidly, but that's fine. Pressure cookers are perfectly fine as a healthy method of cooking. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm having a bit of a struggle with slow cooking. How does that help with I can't imagine food being cooked for 6 hours and that all the vitamins and everything is still there.
It's more to do with the lower heat that you use. So the higher heat is more destructive to the compounds in the food. So even though it's not, it's in terms of where it would sit on the spectrum, it probably wouldn't be the best method, but it's certainly much safer than using a barbecue or grill or frying food or baking food. It is slower, it is a lower heat, there's often a lot more moisture in the food as well. So you want that moist, lower heat to get the benefits or to stop the adverse reaction of the food and producing a lot of these pro-inflammatory compounds. So yes, but I mean, some people need that in terms of their busy lives, something like that. So it's an okay one, not as good as boiling or steaming or eating fresh, of course. Yeah. Yep, back.
We're talking about the sunlight as well. It's very important, and we know that. So can you tell us more about, is there any particular time of the day when we need to do the sunlight? Because we know like Australia is one of the most, if not the most, caused by the skin cancer as well.
Sure.
And also, can you tell us something about the sunscreens as well?
The sunscreen, sure. So what I normally would recommend in summer, it's probably the only time that's important to think about the time of the day. So obviously in areas where you've got daylight saving, the hours between 11 and 3 is when you've got the most intense UV radiation. So you may want to avoid that time. But if you use the calculation of the quarter of the time it would take you to get sunburnt, and that's the only time of the day you can get out and get a bit of sun, which often it is, it's a lunchtime, people have a break then, it's okay to use that time, but just keep it short. So don't go out for long periods of time. So even though sunlight has been kind of demonized in terms of its effect on our skins and skin cancer, it's just because we have abused that privilege of using sunlight rather than the sunlight itself causing all the damage. There is also a school of thought that it's not just sunlight alone, but a whole variety of other factors. For instance, we know that melanomas are often more common. Following sort of the 1950s and 60s, a lot of women were getting melanomas on their legs because they were wearing nylon stockings in particular. So we know that there was something between sunlight, nylon, and the skin that was causing a lot of those issues. The other thing is that we were finding a lot of surfers were getting it on their backs even though they were covered with nylon suits. So we know it's not just purely sunlight that may be the implicator in a lot of these skin cancers, and maybe other factors as well. The other one is polyunsaturated fats, particularly with things like SCCs, BCCs, which are different to melanoma. They're the little skin cancers that you need to get cut out outside of melanomas. There may be an issue with polyunsaturated fats, sunlight, and skin when it comes to that. So it's not always a direct relationship, particularly between sunlight and those cancers. So yes, by all means, if you can avoid that time of the day, use your hours before 11 or after 3 in summer. In winter, it doesn't matter. Spring and autumn, it probably doesn't matter a lot either. It's about using the time it would take to get sunburnt. So if it takes you 15 minutes to get sunburnt at any time of that day, wherever it might be, if it's in the middle or at the beginning, at the end, it doesn't matter. It's about using the time, a quarter of the time it would take you to get sunburnt. The darker your skin, the longer you can stay out. And so rather than restrict the time necessarily, I prefer to just use that formula to know how much sunlight you need. But yes, I would recommend, obviously, to avoid the middle of the day in summer. That would be, yeah. Sunscreens, yes. I could do a whole talk on that one. To be honest, most sunscreens will protect you against melanomas, but not against SCCs and BCCs, which are squamous cell carcinomas or basal cell carcinomas. Those ones that protect you against those other ones have to have a topical zinc or titanium dioxide. It's actually got to have a barrier to the UV radiation. So if you want to protect against melanomas, don't use just all the general sunscreens. You want to use ones that have titanium or zinc oxide in them. So your zinc creams are protective, but the other ones aren't. Yeah.
Can you tell us the impact of our thoughts and our mental condition on the progression and the cause of cancer?
Absolutely. So, and I probably more addressed this in the immune talk, but we do know that mental illness, we do know that stress is a huge, huge problem in our society and one of the biggest triggers to a lot of chronic disease, that not just cancer, heart disease, you name it, diabetes, all of those things, stress can be a major issue. And it changes us physiologically. There's things that happen in our metabolism, in our physiology, when we get under a lot of stress, even if it's just a major stressor or a major trigger, There's changes that can happen in our body that will depress our immune system, that will depress our ability to fight cancers. And, while we're all sitting here, we have little cancers that form and our body takes care of it very, very quickly, very rapidly. But if your immune system's not functioning, if you've got inflammation in your body, whether it's coming from stress or coming from other sources in your lifestyle, it will prevent our immune system from doing its job, for sure. So yes, any cancer treatment that I do often has to address the stress, address how positive they are, whether or not they've got good social contacts, whether they've got good family relationships. All of that's really important when you come to address any chronic disease, including cancer.
I just wanted to ask, you said that to try and avoid processed sugars.
Yes.
What sort of sugar substitutes can we use?
Yeah, stevia is a very good one. So stevia is a herb. It has it's not a sugar in of itself, but it has an intense sweetness. It's actually several times sweeter than sugar itself. So if you can get a stevia plant and use the leaves of the stevia plant yourself, it's quite easy to grow. I'm not sure down here. I do grow it up in New South Wales. So you can either get that just from your own plant. You can get some good stevia products though. So if you make sure it's 100% stevia though, and it doesn't have lots of artificial sweeteners and other things added into it, because then you're going to get a whole host of problems associated with that. But stevia is a great natural sweetener. Fructose is a processed sugar though. I don't tend to use that one, no. It's a very processed sugar from fruit. Even though it comes from fruit, it's not in its whole form. It doesn't have the benefits that it would have from fruit, and it's more harmful, yeah.
Molasses and honey.
Molasses and honey, so honey...
And monk fruit.
Oh yeah, monk fruit, no, that's fine, that one. I can't tell you a lot about molasses. It's still a processed food. Even though it does have more minerals and more vitamins in it, so it's better than sugar, but it's still processed. Honey is not a processed food though. It is considered a whole food. It comes as it is. So I don't actually put honey in the same category that I would put into a processed sugar. In saying that, you certainly wouldn't overdo it. And the other thing is, if you're managing cancer, if you actually have cancer, you do have to be a lot stricter with what you take in. And one of the things that you really need to do is restrict your sugar intake. And so I wouldn't use honey or maple syrup or any of these other things outside of stevia as a sweetener, because you really want to get your body a chance to reduce that sugar load, including even sometimes from natural sources. So for that, I would really stick to your vegetable kingdom, a few fruits, but not the really high sugar fruits, all of those sorts of things, which is what I usually do in a program for cancer. Yeah. Okay. Was there any questions from online that anybody needed to ask? No? Fantastic. All right. Thank you for coming. Tomorrow I will be addressing heart disease and weight loss. Again, sort of combined topics. I encourage you to come along. It will build up on some of the concepts we've already learnt today, and some of them will just be kind of very much thematic that you'll see coming out through all my talks. So look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Thank you guys for listening.